Hello everyone, today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Usually I just stream ranked Joust games, record them, and then upload them to YouTube. But looking for this resource myself, I didn't see it on YouTube anywhere, so I figured I would just make it. Basically today I'm going to be going over the patch 8.5 updates on Smite's website. If you want, you can look at these yourself as well, but I just wanted to go over each of the items that got buffed or nerfed, each of the gods that got buffed or nerfed, and maybe the impact that each of those changes are going to have on Joust specifically, just because I mainly play Joust. I'm mainly a support player in Joust, and we play ranked pretty much every single weekend. And we'll continue to upload those videos too, so I appreciate anybody that watches that. I do have a little kind of special going on right now. If you are one of the first 10 subscribers on my YouTube channel and you comment your gamer tag below, I will send a free tier 2 skin your way for those first 10. It's going to be random. I have no idea what it's going to be for you, but you will get that directly from me. So appreciate everybody watching so far, and hopefully this is helpful too. That being said, let's just hop right into it. The first change that you're going to see on the change log is Wind Demon is getting a bit of a nerf. Crit in Joust isn't necessarily the route that most people go. One, because hunters aren't picked up as often as warriors. The double tank meta is still kind of what's going on right now, so Guardian, Warrior, Mage, seeing a ton of it in Joust. But if you are a hunter player who has been going crit, Wind Demon was basically a must-have item. The typical build, especially in like Conquest even, is Gilded Arrow, Speed Boots, Executioner, Devos, and then right after those items, it would be Wind Demon, and then probably Deathbringer. So decreased movement speed from 20% to 10%. Attack speed decreased from 20% to 15%. I think if you're building crit, you still might want this item in the same slot. The only thing that I could see it maybe swapping out for is like a Rage or something, where this is just clearly better than Rage in the last patch. It might be more of a toss-up in this one. So I don't think it's going to be a huge impact on crit builds specifically, but really I don't think crit's going to be built as often without this item. The next one, which kind of also impacts the viability of crit, maybe taking it a little bit more viable now, but Shell is getting a little bit of a nerf. So instead of providing block stacks, instead of providing 2 block stacks on the upgraded shell, which obviously if you have 3 players that have upgraded shell, that's up to 6 block stacks. For hunters and auto attack gods, that's super detrimental, especially when you're trying to burst somebody down, and if you're relying on not being CC'd or anything like that, you need the burst, and you have 6 of your auto attacks that are getting mitigated completely. Obviously not good. So instead of those 2 block stacks, now the buffed god, the god that has a shield on them, is just going to take 50% less damage from those basic attacks. So you can see where this kind of goes in with that. The crit, if you are building crit now, it might be a little bit more viable in Joust, especially because instead of critting for 500 damage being mitigated down to 0, you're still going to be doing 250 damage to those squishies, which is still quite a bit of damage, especially in late game. So I think you're going to see a few more auto attack gods come back in style here. Osiris is already pretty good in Joust, but you might see more of the auto attack assassins as well. Maybe more Bakusuras. Set was already pretty popular, and I think this nerf to Shell will really bring Set even further up in that assassin tier list. So hopefully, I don't necessarily, as a support player, I liked upgraded shell, but I do see why they changed it, and I think you're probably not going to build it as often as you were before. I still think it can be useful, but having those stacks taken away really will, I think, bring it down a little bit. Next, we have the alternate timeline, so increasing the magical power from 45 to 70. They're really trying to bring this item and have people build it more often, because really I don't see it pretty much ever in our Joust games. And the increased magical power from 45 to 70, I still just don't think it's that viable. I don't know why you would get it over the other upgraded option on that tree, and the power just isn't enough to make up for it. I think if Afro gets through, maybe you build alternate timeline, and then you have basically 2 extra lives or something. But even then, you're relying on getting to the late game. The cooldown is still, I think, 6 minutes. So not an item you necessarily really want to build. I think both conduit trees are better, and then the other alternate build tree on this path of Sands of Time path is better as well. So I don't see this changing much as far as mage builds goes. That being said, I think the Archmage's gem having 200 mana and the Gem of Focus having increased magical power from 90 to 100 does just make even more of a case to build either one of these 2 items or the other upgraded Sands of Time. Archmage's gem, 200 mana. Again, you're not getting this to level 20. Does 200 mana really make a difference at that point? Probably not. If you were building Archmages before, you probably are still building it. But really, I think this is the lesser of the 2 options in the Conduit gem tree as well. Gem of Focus having that increased magical power. Either one of these 2 items, in my opinion, are better than the alternate timeline. I still think Sands of Time is still very, very viable, just because you do get that MP5 and power online and cooldown right away. So if you're spamming abilities, you're not necessarily concerned about the one-shot potential, not necessarily going for that early buff with Conduit Gem, you'll go the Sands of Time route. If you are a mage that kind of struggles to clear early, or you're trying to get that big burst damage off kind of in one shot, then you would do either one of these Conduit Gem routes. Like I said, if you're building Archmages before, keep building it. If you're building Gem of Focus before, keep building it. They're still both very, very good. Admittedly, I am not as familiar with some of the jungle starters, just because I'm a support main on Joust, and really the comps that we tend to play are support warrior mage or support hunter mage. We don't play that much assassin, and when we do, Bluestone is just kind of too good to really forego, because most assassins are trying to build that bruiser style anyways. That being said, Bumbas Spear is getting a little bit of a buff, so they added CDR to it, which cooldown is always valuable, especially early. You can get it for fairly cheap. 200 mana is being taken away, so you got more CDR, less mana. You do have a 10% power buff for 10 seconds after jungle camp structures and bosses. Not as useful in a game mode like Joust, just because there aren't that many times that you're going to be fighting directly after a jungle camp or a jungle boss. Maybe if you're trying to take Bull Demon, or if you're killing a structure and then really trying to dive, it can be useful at times. But I don't know if this will bring Bumbas Spear into the meta, especially just because Bumba's hammer is a lot stronger on a ton of assassins. Another assassin or jungle upgrade that is being rolled out this next patch is Mannequin Hidden Blade. So instead of the basic attack power, it's now providing 60 physical and 90 magical power. The bonus damage is also increasing from 15% of the target's health to 20%. This one is pretty interesting. I still don't know how viable this is going to make it in Joust, just because you do have to get to level 20. But you might want to try this on certain very specific mage picks with that 90 magical power. It's somewhat intriguing. Maybe like a Morrigan or an Ao Kuang, something like that. I just really have a hard time believing you're going to build mannequins early on a mage instead of Conduit or Sands of Time. But I don't know. I think this will be an interesting one that you might be able to surprise some people with that extra power and that extra percent damage on the passive. It might be it might be a tricky one. So keep an eye out for it. I don't know really how impactful it's going to be. But I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting change, and I'm excited to see some people at least try to use it. And then Sear of the Jungle, increased attack speed from 15 to 30%, increase the duration of the buff on the passive so you can see wards for 15 seconds instead of 10 seconds. This one is actually, I think, a lot more viable than the other two. Having the wards being dropped on jungle camps, especially if you're somebody like, Bakusura or Loki, who's really trying to kind of sneak around and take their camps and kind of do things on their side of the map on Joust. Again, not as valuable in the Joust game mode, but there are certain gods who I do think it can be really, really nice on, especially with the things like Magic Shell being nerfed. I think a lot more of those auto attack based gods are going to kind of come back into style in Joust. And this having attack speed on top of those things, I think it could be an interesting combination, especially like Bakusura. You're getting 30% attack speed from an upgraded item, which is pretty giant. So interesting. If there are any assassin mains out there that have tried these and have opinions, gladly love to hear those. This is coming from a support player mostly who is not as familiar, admittedly, with these specific items. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of the jungle items for sure. Next, we have some of the warrior starters. So Warrior's Axe getting the increased health steal from 25 to 30, and then a decreased cooldown from 10 seconds to 8 seconds. So a little bit of a buff, and obviously this is because Bluestone is just the complete dominant pick for pretty much all warriors. If you're maybe not on like Osiris as an auto attacker or something like that, but if you're an an ability based warrior, there's just no reason not to buy Bluestone right now. It's too good. You have too much early damage, which is already what warriors kind of excel at. I don't know how much this is going to really bring Warrior's Axe back into the Joust meta. I still think Bluestone is going to be your number one pick, but there might be a few more situations now where you buy Warrior's Axe instead of it. And then the other warrior item, Warding Sigil, increased physical protection from 10 to 15. I don't think that's really going to do much for this item. I think Warding Sigil is somewhat underrated as a starter item, but realistically, when it's compared to something like a Bluestone, when you get that early damage, it's just really, really difficult for me to make a case for it compared to Bluestone. Bluestone is going to be your complete, offensive-based item if you're a warrior. Warrior's Axe, you're going to have a little bit more sustain and kind of be that middle of the road. You're going to be able to health steal, but also do a little bit more damage, whereas Warding Sigil is, if you're just completely diving in the middle of the team, you may pick this up instead of the other two, or maybe if you're the only support on your team in Joust, but even then you're probably picking up Sentinels or one of the actual support starters too. So I don't know. I don't think Warding Sigil is going to be picked up very often, but you might see Warrior's Axe a little bit more. Benevolence, a small nerf. The effect is only giving one nearby ally the bonus gold instead of the having it given to more than one. So that'll be a little bit of a change for this one. I think this is probably the least built starter item for Guardians right now in comparison to Warflag or Sentinels. And I still think Benevolence has its place for sure. I think next patch with some of the changes, Benevolence might come into the meta a little bit more, especially because you're seeing gods like Athena, who has really good ability to auto attack, and then also Terra, things like that, who have some of these auto attack steroids too, or augments so that they get cleave damage. And I think Benevolence is good, and it still allows your carry to build faster. If they're getting their build online faster than the other team is, that's still going to be good. So I'd watch out for Benevolence. I'm already have been building this more often just in preparation of patch 8.5. So we'll see if that comes to fruition too. Compassion's getting a little bit of an upgrade. It's providing 8 gold per 5 seconds, which is really, really good as well. animosity and compassion. Between the two of those upgrades, compassion is going to be your more defensive one, and then animosity is going to be obviously more offensive. You're probably building that on people like Athena, like Terra, like I was saying before, and maybe compassion you're building on people with a little bit more health, right? Kumba, Free, or someone like Cthulhu or something like that. So I'd watch out for these two items for sure. I think they're gonna pop up a little bit in popularity for sure. And then Sentinels Boon, increasing the health and mana restored from the passive from 3% to 4% per assist. The problem that I think I have with Sentinels Boon is a lot of the time I just think Sentinels Embrace is a better item, especially when you're splitting the protections that Embrace gives among only 3 people, having to rely on assists to get that health and mana restoration for Sentinels Boon, which you should be getting assists if you're a support technically, but you have fewer people to get those assists from. I don't know. I still think Sentinels Embrace is the better of the two in most situations, but if you're being super aggressive, I do think Sentinels Boon is still a very good item. And honestly, any of the support items are good because you can upgrade them at level 17 instead of level 20 for the other starters. So once you hit that level 17 power spike, you really have a pretty big advantage over the other team for a solid 3 levels if they're not building any of those support starters. Next, we have Kyron's Coin, decreased magical cost from 2,500 to 2,400, and then increased magical power from 80 to 90. I think this one is going to have a pretty big impact on mage builds. Right now, you see a lot of people rush Tahuti or rush Spear. I think Kyron's Coin may have a case instead of those two things. Pretty cheap at 2,400, pretty decent magical power. It's obviously not the 160 you get from Tahuti, but you're getting it online a lot faster, and you get that 20% pen with Kyron's Coin just right away. It makes it feel better when you're late game and you're kind of struggling to find that percent pen to kill tanks, especially in double tank comps. The 20% pen is just nice to already have online once you get to that point, and it allows a little bit more diversity at the end of your build, so you're not stuck into that pen tree. So we'll see. I think it could be interesting. I think it might be a decent substitute for Tahuti or Spear of Deso as a first item or a rush, but we'll have to wait and see on that part too. Spear of the Magus. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. Let's go back to Book of Thoth. Book of Thoth getting a little bit of a buff, increased mana contribution by 1%, and they increased MP5 from 15 to 20 as well. A few mages can do the Book of Thoth rush already fairly well, talking about gods like Baba Yaga or Kukulcon. Really utilize Book of Thoth to their fullest potential, and I think you're going to see them be a little bit more viable in this next upcoming patch too. Cuckoo's already a very, very safe mage, a backline artillery mage that can do a ton of damage over time on you, and with these slight upgrades, I don't think it really makes him OP by any means, but you will have an increased viability from Kukulcon for sure. Spear of the Magus, I kind of skipped to this one just because I know I skipped over Thoth just because I'm very, very interested to see how this impacts the meta. So Magus is getting 12% lifesteal. Why that's interesting is because in the pen tree, it's the only option that has lifesteal on it. So before, where if you're Anubis or if you're Hades or Zhang Kui or somebody who really, really wants lifesteal, it kind of felt bad to go into the pen tree even though you know you needed it, just because you're foregoing a item that could have had lifesteal on it. That's not the case anymore. On top of that, I think having lifesteal for high power mages, even if they're not necessarily lifesteal focused, is just going to allow for kind of a crazy amount of sustain from certain mages, even going back to people like Kukulcon, who is constantly hitting whirlwinds and just gaining a little bit of health each time on that, already being able to sustain and just sit back. Really, really going to be annoying for a lot of comps. I'm trying to think of other, like Scylla, super high powered mage. Every time she hits a crush or any of her abilities, she's going to be healing up a ton. On top of the other benefit of Magus, which is just being able to really focus one person in Joust, especially you only have 3 people. If one person is tagged, clearly your teammates can kind of follow up on that. They're going to be able to see it. So I think this is going to kind of rocket to the top of a lot of people's priority list when it comes to the pen tree. And maybe it's not going to work as well as I think it's going to, but I really think this is going to be built a ton, even on if you think of like supports or guardians who, if they just build this one item, they have 12% lifesteal on their abilities too. It just makes them stay alive for a little bit longer, which is really, really important in a 3v3 game mode. Mail of Renewal decreased the health from 300 to 250, but they also decreased the time that the heal takes to complete from 20 to 10 seconds. So why that's a buff is because before, where you weren't healing as you were healing more over a longer period of time, now you're healing a little bit less over half that time. So again, the whole reason for this item is to kind of help you stay alive. Before, you were still able to just get bursted within 10 seconds and the heal couldn't do anything for you. So we'll see. I've tried to work this item into my builds before, but it's just I don't see many ways that this item is better than Stone of Gaia or Thebes or any of the other items in that tree. So we'll see. I think there are certain gods who can use it. Cthulhu, ton of health. If you're healing that over a shorter period of time, he's going to be a lot tankier too. But we'll see if that's the case with this next patch. Stone of Fall also decreased the cost from 2,500 to 2,350. But really, I think the problem with this item isn't the cost; it's just the utility. Only having that benefit when you're auto attacking kind of limits the viability. If you're thinking of using this, I would stick to those same auto attack based guardians that we talked about before, Athena or Terra. Maybe you're building this on hybrid mages like Ao Kuang, or maybe you're building this on certain auto attack warriors too, but I don't know. I think it doesn't really have a place still. They're trying to make it happen, but I just don't see it being more valuable than Voidstone or Stone of Binding in that same tree either. Now on to the gods. So Persephone is getting a rework. If you want to kind of go over this rework fully, I would definitely suggest watching someone like Duke Sloth or Incon or one of those other content creators who's going to kind of really dive into the differences. I'll go over them very, very quickly and let you know my thoughts on them. But if you want a full breakdown of Persephone and the rework, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of videos on that once she pops out. The first change that's happening is her Pomegranate Granite seeds. So before, when she was able to revive and do damage, that's kind of taken away now. She cannot deal damage or apply any sort of CC. So the only benefit of reviving now in the next patch is going to be that she can plant her seeds, her skulls, before she gets up there. So if you die, you can still go kind of in the enemy jungle and plant them, or kind of around the tower so that they're all sprouted when you get back up. But that's really the only benefit of that passive. So obviously a lot less useful. Gonna have to kind of plan ahead where you think the team fights are going to be. I think this shifts her viability down a little bit. Obviously, having a second life in Joust was pretty big. Even though you're doing less damage, you're still having to focus on that Persephone, or at least your attention is being focused on that Persephone to not be hit by her abilities if you're in a team fight and she's back alive. So pretty big change on that front. Also, Bone Rush, instead of having a topple AoE, now it's going to be a larger charge on it. She can aim it up until she fires a projectile. So before, when you kind of clicked your the button to fire it, it's stuck on that one line that you had clicked. Now you can move it around, and kind of before, it's just going to be easier to hit for somebody who's running away or trying to dodge the ability, right? Before, where it was kind of a straight line, and you hope that you guessed where that person was going to be at the time period that it fired. Now you can really aim it up to that. So I think this is going to help this ability feel a little bit better. And it also slows, which is kind of setting her up for some of her other abilities. The next one, Harvest. The biggest change on this ability is that they're taking away the middle version of the Harvest skulls. So the initial skull that heals is still going to be there, and then the third skull now, which is going to be the only other skull at the time of the update, is the flower skull that chases. So before, Persephone's would plant the skulls and use the burst damage from the explosion. That's gone away now. So instead of that, what the ability is, it's kind of an AoE circle that blows up when you hit that ability, and then the plants, it's going to be 3 plants, I think, outside of that little circle that automatically go into skulls right away and then change into flowers eventually. So you can aim that charge direction of the flowers kind of based on where you want the flowers to go. And from what I've seen, I don't think they actually chase. It's more of you shoot the flowers in a direction and they kind of keep going until they hit somebody. So a little bit easier to avoid. Before, you had to run at the flowers almost and then kind of diagonally go right or left based on where that flower was going to hit. So this is going to be an interesting rework on this ability, and I think it's going to be easier for a lot of people, but we'll see what that change brings. And then Flourish, instead of generating a pre-germinated seed, since there is no sprout anymore, there's only the skull and the flower, it's going to do damage right away, so you don't have to put the flower down and then jump away. You're just going to be able to jump away and have the damage. So a little bit less deep, but still kind of the same application on Flourish. Then lastly, obviously kind of Persephone's biggest game-changing mechanic is her ultimate. Little change on it. It's not going to constrict the movement the closer you get to the middle of the entrapping vines. So there's going to be a little bit more of the option to fight inside of it instead of always trying to run away or get away from it. You can move away. You're going to be slower when you're running away compared to running towards the center. So it'll be interesting to see what this one still brings. I think it can still be a pretty good utility ability in Joust just because there are a ton of walls. You can still shoot it at walls. It still goes forever from what I'm seeing, so you can shoot it all the way across the map if you want to. You can use it to trap the other team so you can secure objectives or trap the other team's getaway route. I think that Persephone is still going to be fairly popular in Joust. Just maybe not that insta-ban like she has been for a while. Other gods that are getting changes, Gilgamesh, obviously the latest god who was released. Seeing a ton of this guy in Joust, in casual Joust games. He already got one little nerf, but we're going to go over this one too. Sunforged Scimitar, decreased burst damage at all later levels. So instead of having 170 and 205 damage at the last couple levels, it's only going to be 155 and 185. I still think Gilgamesh's viability in Joust is really his early damage and how much he can kind of snowball. So I don't see this as being as big of a nerf to him. 5 damage less on the second tier. Not going to make a huge difference, especially when that scimitar just refreshes itself. And then dropkick, the stun duration, instead of being 1.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, it is now 1.2 seconds at every single rank. So again, I think realistically this isn't, in some ways, this is obviously a nerf to the dropkick, right? Where the duration is not as long the later the game gets. That being said, you do get it 1.2 at all ranks, so it's kind of an early buff to this ability. It's 0.1 second longer, which may not make a huge difference, but if you're trying to kill someone and burst somebody down early, it could be the difference between killing them or not. You're going to see a ton of this guy in Joust, so if you're not already practicing this god or knowing how to play against this god, I do think he's probably going to replace Persephone as that number one ban, or he's always going to be banned. I do think he has some pretty decent counters that we've found. People like Ares, people like Bacchus, anybody who's knock up immune can really shut down that drop kick pretty easily, and then he's in a really bad position. So we'll see if that actually, if this does anything to him. I still think he's going to be super viable and a first pick in most cases. Next, we have Tiamat. So she's getting a little bit of a nerf. Lifetime of her Basilisk is going down from 21 seconds to 11 seconds. That goes from 6 total lizards to 4 total lizards. I don't know if that makes a huge difference in Joust. We see a ton of her. She's pretty strong. She's banned a lot. Really the only, especially in Joust, her Basilisks aren't as big of a pain compared to Conquest, where you can set them down in a different lane and just have them run down that lane. Joust is just kind of one lane with a little bit of a jungle. The one thing that this will affect is some of the games we've played, the Tiamat's able to just set the Basilisk down at like Bull Demon and then solo it. So I don't know if she's going to be able to do that anymore with the having 4 lizards instead of 6. So that'll be interesting. I still think she's a pretty strong pick. She can stay alive pretty well when people are diving her. So I don't know if this is going to change too much of her viability. Just some of the cheesy stuff that she's able to do she may not be able to do anymore. Bakusura. Like I was talking about before, there's a lot of changes coming with auto attack items and items that you build against auto attack. So Bakusura is also getting a buff on 2 of his abilities. Mana cost for eat minion is going down, so he's going to be able to eat more minions more often. And it restores mana on top of that. So he's going to be able to sustain a little bit longer. He's going to be able to run around the map a lot faster because he's eating minions kind of everywhere he goes. And then he does have a decreased cooldown from 14 to 12 seconds on Butcher Blades, which is kind of his key ability too. So I do think that this might affect his viability in Joust. I think good Bakusura players could always make an impact, but he's just pretty easily CC'd. So I don't know. I think with Shell getting nerfed, with some of the jungle items getting buffed, with him getting buffed, he is a menace when he's just stealing all of your farm and you can't do anything about it. So just if you're playing against one, make sure you got the ward coverage. But yeah, I think he can be pretty good, and he's still pretty decent with a bruiser-ish type build. So we'll see. You might see more Bakusura in your games for sure. Bologna, Bloodjam is getting an increased spin damage, and then Eagle's Rally getting an increased stun from 1 second to 1.25 seconds. The increased stun is interesting. That's kind of a pretty significant buff. An extra quarter of a second does make a difference, even though it doesn't sound like too much. But really, I still think the problem with her is that she just has too many things with her bludgeon that can interrupt her. So it's hard to get her spin damage fully off, and then the knockdown fully off. But we'll see. Again, with some of the auto attack stuff, she does seem to come back into the metas where the auto attack items are better. I just think there are better warriors in Joust than her, even auto attack warriors. Osiris is going to be better, and then even some of the the bruiser type assassins are going to be better, I think. So check her out. I would definitely see if the items make her a better pick, but she's probably one of the least picked warriors in Joust for what we see. Kyron getting a little bit of a buff, and maybe even more of a little bit of a buff, but the Giddy Up ability, his dash, is now knock up immune. So pretty big. I think he kind of had one of the weakest getaway abilities for hunters, which we pick him here and there. I think Cupid's a better hunter in Joust. I think Huyi's a better hunter on her, and like Medusa are all really good hunters in Joust. But if you're looking for more of a backline safe from a distance hunter, Kyron is actually pretty good when we've been playing him, especially with the Bluestone buff. He abuses Bluestone pretty well, being able to hit his 1 and then 2 with the Bluestone on top of it. He does a lot of damage early, and he's very, very safe, and I do think that this makes him a little bit safer, and he might be more of a priority pick too in 8.5. Just thinking of before, if you're dashing away and you're playing against someone like a Bacchus or a Xing Chen or maybe a Cthulhu who's in his ultimate. If you're galloping away, now you're not going to get interrupted out of your dash. You can get away a lot easier, so I think he's going to be even safer. Definitely, I think that he's going to be viable in Joust, and keep an open mind if all the other hunters are getting banned out, which fairly rare that you see that happen. But I think he's definitely a god that can benefit from this change. Dodgy, 1,000 cuts, increased base damage from 25, 45, 65, 85, 105 to 30, 50, 70, 90, 110. So she really benefits from this for sure. 1,000 cuts is kind of her main thing, along with the burn damage, and then Trickster Spirit increasing the damage at all levels as well. So Dodgy, you mostly do want to play as a burst god. Kind of going back to the same reason that Bakusura, you might see him a little bit more. You might start seeing Dodgy too. I think she's kind of always been a sneaky strong pick in Joust, just her ability to hit the ultimate and pull people from half the map away, underneath a tower or something. It's kind of a game-changing ultimate in a game mode that people are likely more often grouped up than other game modes. And these buffs, along with the shell being kind of nerfed a little bit, and then some of the other jungle items being buffed, I think she's going to be pretty good. Fafnir getting a few buffs, decreased cooldown from 15 seconds to 15, 14 and a half, 14, 13 and a half, and 13. And then the cooldown also applies to his ability in dragon form. And then underhanded tactics, decreasing the cooldown from 18 to 15 seconds, and also applying to the ability 3 in dragon form. I think Fafnir is probably in the bottom 3 guardians in Joust. Just having a guardian that is stuck in the same place while he transforms back and forth is just not that useful. While you're transforming, your team's already probably getting bursted down, or if you happen to have to transform back, you're getting bursted down. I just don't think he's that useful in Joust, and I don't think that these buffs are going to necessarily change that. He takes too long to get online, and the cooldowns are still pretty egregious. 13 seconds is a long time to wait for an ability, and 15 seconds is a long time to wait for an ability too. So I still think he's going to be stuck down there in the bottom 3. Maybe you can play him more as a secondary, more damagey guardian or something. But as far as a pure support goes, I don't think that this makes him any more viable than he was before 8.5. Hera getting a few buffs as well. So increased damage, power scaling on her polymorph from 75 to 80%. And her shield is getting a little bit of a buff too. So from 50 to 250 all the way to 70 to 230. So buffed at the early levels, a little bit of a nerf at the later levels. So we'll see. I think Hera comes in and out. I don't think she's a top tier pick. but she can work really well if there's somebody that knows how to play her well, especially having Argus as basically a fourth player on your team can kind of shift the tide of fights a lot when the other team isn't expecting it. The Shroud is still really, really good. I think people underestimate how useful it is to get away. She still suffers from, if somebody has a Sunder or something, that gets taken away pretty easily. But with some of these buffs, I think Hera can be a fairly safe backline artillery mage as well. So I think you'll see more of her in 8.5 too. Kukulcon Slipstream, a decreased cooldown from 15 at all ranks to 15, 14.5, 14, 13.5, and 13. Obviously, this is Cuckoo's getaway ability, and it is one that if he has it up more often, he's going to be even safer. I think Cuckoo's going to be seen a lot in Joust in 8.5, with Thoth getting the buff, with Magus getting lifesteal, with certain other items that he can kind of abuse. Karen's coin he can get online as well and have that percent pen for a fairly cheap amount. I think you're going to see a ton of him, and he's just so safe in Joust. You can have two frontline, warrior guardians, and he can sit behind them and basically free cast, and the other team just can't get to him if he's playing far enough back. And with the decreased cooldown, he's going to be able to get away from things even easier. So definitely one of the guys that I hate playing against the most as a support, just because I can't seem to lock him down compared to a lot of other mages. But definitely think he's going to be viable. If you need a safe mage, this is probably going to be your main pick in 8.5. Medusa, Lacerate, getting increased healing debuff from 3 to 4 seconds, and a decreased cooldown from 15 seconds to 15, 14.5, 14, 13.5, and 13. So Medusa already, I think, is a pretty good pick in Joust, and this is just going to help her early game out a little bit more. Healing debuff lasting longer, and then the cooldown, so you can use that Lacerate a little bit more often. But the problem with Medusa is still that the Lacerate gets caught so easily. So if she's trying to run away from something and hits a minion, she's stuck on it. If you're picking Medusa before and you're having success with her, I think that she can still be useful for sure, especially into some of these healing comps and you want to hit people early with that Lacerate and just delete them. I think she's still going to be able to do that, and maybe do it a little bit easier now that you have longer for that healing debuff to last early game. But I think she's always been a fairly high on the tier list for hunters. And I think she'll kind of stay where she's at. Not necessarily first pick worthy, but definitely viable. And lastly, we have Mulan. So her cross strike is getting a buff duration from 4 to 6 seconds, and her grapple is getting a buff duration from 4 to 6 seconds as well, with a little bit longer of a stun. Playing Mulan a little bit these past couple patches, her early game damage is pretty insane. So these buffs are definitely going to help her with that, especially the stun duration being 0.2 seconds longer. Again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that 0.2 seconds can mean the difference between life and death for the person that you grapple. So early game, still going to be very, very strong. She can cancel out of her ultimate now, so that makes her a little bit more mobile, not as much of a sitting duck when she's sitting there just taking the other team's damage. But I think you're picking Mulan as a secondary bruiser type warrior. You're not picking her as the only support. I think she falls off just way too hard late game. If you're picking her, you're going for that early damage, that early kind of snowball, run it down type comp. And then outside of that, she just is not that useful late game. But if you're going for that early kind of comp and you have that, I think she's a sneaky strong pick that is only going to be a little bit better with these buffs. So that is it. That's all that I have for some of the 8.5 updates. Like I said, I'm not a grandmaster. I'm not a master by any means, but I keep up with the meta at a pretty decent pace. and play often enough that I can kind of hopefully lean on some of my own observations, and hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you took away one or two things, and it helps you in your Joust matches. If you're looking for other Joust content creators, Trelly Relly is a really good one, uploads often. Davo, kind of one of his teammates. Cosmos uploads fairly often as well. So all those guys, if you're looking for really high level gameplay, that's who you're going to watch. But I didn't see any of those guys kind of going over the updates to 8.5 and what impact they're going to have on Joust metas and kind of decisions for team comps and things like that. So figured I would make it myself. If you enjoyed, please do like, subscribe. If you want to see anything else like this specifically for Joust, just comment below, and hopefully you learned something. And if you like these, I'll keep making them. I'll kind of just lean on anybody to put me in my place in some of these descriptions and stuff too. Always want to hear everyone else's opinion, because I'm not always right 100% of the time either. So appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. Again, hopefully you learned something from it, and I'll see you guys next time.